seminar, Juan Torres Rincón. So he is going to tell us about the mesons in a thermal environment. So Juan did his PhD in Madrid, and then he has done postdocs in stages in Barcelona, in Nantes, in Frankfurt, in Stony Brook, and now again in Frankfurt. And he's an expert in hard particles in thermal environments and transport properties. And he's going to tell us about the mesons. So, okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Start?
Yeah, thank you, Miguel. So yeah, let me start by thanking also the department for giving the opportunity to present this seminar today, and to Miguel also to organize this event in Zoom. And yeah, I'm going to report on some results, recent results we did on charm physics, in particular on the mesons, not only in vacuum, but also at finite temperature, which is a work we did in collaboration with the Barcelona group. So it's Gloria Montaña, who is PhD student at the University of Barcelona, then Laura Tolós, who is at the Institute of Space Sciences, and Àngels Ramos, which is also in the University of Barcelona. And yeah, this covers a couple of works, a couple of papers, one which is already published, and the second paper, which we are working on that, and will be posted soon, hopefully. So this is the outline of my talk. So I have divided into two parts. The first part concerns about effective field theory to describe the mesons, and this is related to the published paper. So I will comment on the interaction of the mesons with light particles, and I will put a special role in the so-called unitarization to produce some scattering amplitudes, which has some physical meaning, really to have some physical cross sections. And then I will talk about how to implement finite temperature calculations in this effective approach. So I will be able at the end of the day to show you the properties of these D mesons, like masses and decay widths, as a function of temperature. Then the second part of the talk, I will do some more Merivale physics. So at the point to develop a transport equation or kinetic equation for D mesons, and how these thermal effects have to be accounted in order to construct this transport equation. I will show you all these effects, thermal effects, from the point of view of the thermal width of the D meson, which is also connected with the first part. And finally, what I'm going to show you is the relevant transport coefficients, which we can also compute for these guys, like the diffusion coefficient or the drag force. So let me start with some kind of motivation to study these D mesons. So I typically start with this phase diagram of QCD as a function of temperature and baryochemical potential. And as you know, we would like to understand the different phases that appear in this QCD phase diagram. And we usually do by performing relativistic heavy ion collisions. And in particular, we are interested to look at properties of this quark-gluon plasma at high temperature and high densities. But the point is that from heavy ion collisions, we can only extract information from the final state. So we are looking at the system already in this region, basically zero temperature. So then, yeah, we cannot observe this quark-gluon plasma directly. But to connect the two, the final state and the initial state, well, many things happen in between. All right, so this quark-gluon plasma has interactions. They undergo some phase transition, possibly first order phase transition. And then in the hadron gas, still these hadrons interact and these resonances can decay, but you can also have regeneration of states. So the connection between the two parts here is complicated and it's not trivial. So the point is to find some particular observable, some proof that has a clear link between the two phases, the two sectors. And in this context, these are called these hard proofs to do this link, which contains, for example, physics of jets, high energetic partons produced at the initial collision, also the electromagnetic probes like photons or dileptons at high momentum, but it also includes heavy flavor. Yeah? So states that contain charm or bottom quarks. Could be in the form of quarkonia, like the YEP-Psi and this kind of states, or could also be at open flavor hadrons, which is the part in which I'm going to focus. So why are these important to know something about QGP? Well, these heavy quarks like charm and bottom, they are formed at the very initial stage of the collision. And basically, roughly speaking, this formation time for these states are roughly inverse proportional to the mass. So they are created at the very initial stage. And on top of this, they are very difficult to equilibrate. I mean, this typical relaxation time basically increases with the mass. So they have a very large relaxation time along the evolution. So they do not reach usually thermalization. Of course, they also undergo this phase transition. And at the end, you find these states in the form of D mesons, for example, D mesons, any other state, which still keeps propagating. There are still interactions in the hadronic phase. But then, again, they are still very difficult, so they can reach this equilibration. So they propagate, they interact in some medium. The background medium or the bath has much shorter relaxation time, so we keep that this medium has already some temperature there. So I will in particular focus on these D mesons and also the vector ones, the D star mesons, and study the interaction with the light particles. So in particular, I will study vacuums of zero temperature, but also these D mesons I will put inside of a bath, thermal bath at some temperature, which will be always smaller than 150 MeV. So I cannot really go much beyond that point. So the bath or the light sector is composed by mesons, light mesons, which will be this pion, kaon, antikaon, and eta meson. So I will consider the whole octet of Goldstone bosons, basically. And in this picture, I will, of course, use the fact that the heavy mass, the mass of the D meson, is the dominant scale of the problem. So this is much larger than the masses of all these light mesons, but also larger than the temperature or lambda QCD or any other scale. So the picture we have in mind we study this is kind of a Brownian particle which is propagating in a thermal bath. And what we can do with this is to study transport properties, transport coefficients for this particular sector. So in this case, it's called, you can define a diffusion coefficient for heavy particles, which is standard diffusion coefficient in the sense that this transport property that relates some gradient, in this case a gradient of concentration of particles, say charm, and some non-equilibrium flux. And this coefficient, this diffusion coefficient, of course, it depends on the interaction between the charm particle and the thermal bath, so the cross sections, and the properties of the medium itself, like temperature or chemical potentials if you have some chemical potential. So only at the end of my talk, I will show you the results for this coefficient. But not only thermal effects are important, even if you keep zero temperature, look at vacuum properties, well, the D meson spectroscopy is also interesting by itself. I mean, I show you here different states in this charm sector with different quantum numbers, the total angular momentum and the strangeness, which I took from the particle data group. And I put many of them, but you can see that there are some ground states. Yeah, so this D meson is the ground state in the charm sector, but you also have the strange counterpart, the DS, and the vectors. Yeah, here D star and D star. And I also put here some resonances. In fact, if you look at the zero strangeness sector, you find these two resonances, the DS 2300s and the D1 4230, which are very broad resonances. So here the height of this box means the width of these resonances, which can decay to the ground state, emitting a pion in both cases. But the funny thing is that the strangeness one channel, what you have is it's a quasi-bound state, basically. It's not a resonance, the decay width is very small, it's a bound state called 2317, and the same for the vector sector. And to understand this form and how the masses of the different resonances follow this hierarchy, well, this is also interesting by itself. So I will consider these states in my talk, not only in vacuum, but also you will see I will also consider this a finite temperature. So yeah, let me start now with the first part of the talk, which is about effective field theory to describe these heavy mesons. So we use some effective field theory, so we have some effective Lagrangian, which is based on two main pillars. So the first one is chiral symmetry, because we need to incorporate these Goldstone bosons there, pion, kaons, so on. So we need to expand our Lagrangian in terms of this so-called chiral expansion. And this we do it up to next to leading order. But again, this chiral symmetry is in any case broken already explicitly by the mass, by the physical masses of these guys. Okay, but this expansion, this chiral expansion, you break this symmetry in a controlled way. So that's a good point. And of course, on the other hand, we would like to describe the mesons, so we have to use also to incorporate what is called like heavy quark symmetry or heavy quark spin flavor symmetry. Yeah. And this is an expansion in the inverse mass, powers of the inverse mass of the heavy guy, yeah, the D meson. And in this case, we keep this expansion at leading order. We don't need to go to next to leading order, but this is already a good approximation. Of course, this symmetry, heavy quark symmetry, is broken explicitly also when we plug the precise masses of these states. And in this case, we follow some previous works on this side. There are many of them, already several, 20 years old. So basically all details you can find in all these references. But if I follow in particular this reference here, 2010, well, I show you here a little bit the effective Lagrangian. So this part here could be the format leading order, and at the bottom it could be the next to leading order, always in this chiral counting. And there are many things here, but you see that in any case, the D meson appears as an explicit degrees of freedom, which is this red D that appears everywhere. And the light sector, which is contained in this U, this is the standard exponential representation for the Goldstones people use, for example, in chiral perturbation theory. So this is also appearing here explicitly, and but not only there, but also in these covariant derivatives also contain powers of this. Well, then this U, which are powers of your Goldstone bosons. So you see there are kinetic terms, there are interaction terms, you have some couplings that you need to fix. And if you go to next to leading order, you also have some coefficients, H, up to from H0 to H5, typically called like that, which you also need to fix. These are not fixed by symmetry, but you need to fix somehow by other ways. So once you have the effective Lagrangian, what you can do is just to construct the Feynman rules for the scattering of the D mesons with any of these like degrees of freedom. This is what we call the perturbative amplitude. Perturbative because it's done at next to leading order, and we stop there. And it has this form. So it's a function of the energies, momenta of the particles. Basically, it's a function of the Mandelstam variables. Just notice that this is a power of energy. So it's basically polynomial in energies or momenta, where the scale here is set by the pion decay constant, which appears everywhere. You have some coefficients, isospin coefficients, which are simply pure numbers, and they are given simply by this expansion of the exponential. These are known, fixed by symmetry. And this low energy constant that I mentioned, which also appears in the next to leading order. So this, in principle, you don't know. You have to fix the experiment. If you know how to construct this Lagrangian for your fundamental theory from QCD, in principle, you could also fix those. In our case, we simply take these parameters from a recent calculation, which uses the same Lagrangian, and do a match with lattice QCD calculations. So basically doing some matching, they are able to obtain these coefficients, and then this is the one, those that we are going to use. So once we know that, we know the probability amplitude of this process. Yeah, it is always some binary scattering of the heavy meson with the light meson. We have all these possibilities, so it's not only the meson, it's also the strange counterpart, and also all possibilities given by symmetry of elastic and both inelastic channels. Yeah, so interaction with pions, but also with eta mesons, kaons, and so on. So we have already access to this information. However, there is a problem here. If you stop there, well, the problem is that the scattering matrix forces to have some unitarity constraint, which is lost if you perform some truncation in your Lagrangian. So you stop next to leading order. So then the unitarity constraint is not fulfilled exactly, but only in a perturbative way. However, this brings bad consequences when you would like to extend the cross sections, for example, at moderate energies. Yeah? This puts some really restricted validity of your field. And what we would like to do is basically to impose exact unitarity to the scattering amplitude, maybe at the cost of losing our power counting, well, this is when doing connection with phenomenology, it's much better to impose exact unitarity. So the way of doing that is to define a new amplitude we call T matrix amplitude, which is computed in some kind of Lyman-Schwinger equation. So we have this potential, perturbative potential at the first order approximation for T. But we do not stop there. We consider some infinite number of diagrams where the external particles can re-scatter 1 time, 2 times, and so on. So then you have to solve this kind of integral equation to get the full T matrix from here. Now this is a complicated equation to solve, but if we, in this kind of chiral models, there is some standard procedure, which is called on-shell factorization of this kernel here, which allows us to simply transform this integral equation in some algebraic equation, which you can directly solve like this. Yeah, so what you need to have here to construct your T is your perturbative amplitudes and this function G. So this function G is a propagator, it's two-particle propagator, which is basically the loop here in these diagrams. It's essentially the propagator of the D meson, propagator of the light particle, and then integrated over internal momentums. Yeah, this is something which is possible to compute, and then we can extract it. Now, notice that T as a difference with respect to V, this has some denominator here that can bias and go to 0. Yeah? So this T can have some pole. But there is a physical interpretation for this kind of poles. So when you solve for this T matrix, you can have this kind of effects. Yeah? When you look, you extend this to the complex energy plane. So this S, or square root of S, with the energy, you do it complex, you can find these structures here. These are poles of the T matrix, T squared in this case, that appear at some positions of the complex energy. So these are associated with resonances in which the real part of this pole are related to the mass of the resonance, and the imaginary part of the pole is related to the decay width of the resonance state. Now that could happen that you get one of these poles, but not in any position, but along the real axis, like this example here. So this is still a pole, but because the imaginary part of the pole is 0, that means that there is no decay width, we call this bound state. Yeah? And this, of course, the real part of this state is always below the two-particle threshold, below any threshold. That's the reason it cannot decay, so the imaginary part is 0. So this is the kind of situation that we can find, and this is very interesting because we can describe much more big number of states after we perform this unitarization. So now I will show you the results that we collected in our publication for these dynamically generated states. We consider these both sectors, like a scalar sector in the left and the vector sector in the right, but they are, in some sense, they are parallel because they are related by heavy quark spin symmetry. So if you just focus maybe on the left, what I show here is all the different poles that we find in the complex energy plane. And of course, each of these poles we would like to associate to some state which is known by the particle data group. In this case, the identification of these poles is done here. One is with the resonant state that I showed you at the beginning, this 2300s, and the other one that I showed you is the bound state is associated with this 2370 strange bound state. Now, there is a comment here is that this resonance, which is appears in the PDG, I mean, it has been observed somehow, it contains a double pole structure. So there are two poles in different positions of the complex energy that contribute to this state. It was something that was not clear, say 8 years ago when we started doing this. But now in the recent times, this has been clarified, in particular by these papers, and now it's more or less understood that this is the case for this state. This is not the first time they observed this double pole structure in hadron physics. There are other examples. If you would like to have a look, I mean, this mini radio by Ulf Meissner, there's some examples there, and you can just, it's a bit more pedagogical written. So, okay, how we do this now at finite temperature? So we would like to use the same kind of approach to finite temperature. So what we apply here is the so-called imaginary time formalism. Yeah, we still do quantum field theory, but the difference is that our energies, or the zero component of all our momenta, are really, well, they become some discrete Matsubara frequencies. Yeah, you have this kind of new representation. Now, of course, when you integrate over energies, this integration is transformed by a sum, a discrete sum over Matsubara frequencies, which are like this for our case, for bosonic frequencies, looks like this. And then the temperature is encoded here. Yeah? It's implemented in these Matsubara frequencies. Well, the idea is just simply applying this imaginary time formalism. We can just compute the same thing, but now there is a big difference, I would say, with respect to vacuum, which is you need to impose self-consistency of your equations. And the idea is that, yeah, you can use the same kind of T-matrix approach. Let's look at this equation here, which is the same formally is the same equation, but this G propagator, which again is this internal loop here, you need to consider a dress propagator of your intermediate particles. So now your D meson and your in principle, your light meson propagator are dressed by temperature effect. So if you go to the expression at the top, this G function, now you have to consider, you have thermal effects already here, because you see these F functions are distribution functions, they depend on temperature. But you in principle need to consider also, to be a bit more general, and consider some spectral function of your particles, yeah, due to this dressing in medium. Now the spectral function, it is simply the imaginary part of the propagator, can be expressed in terms of some self-energy. The particles are dressed because the self-energy is modified by medium effects. And this is the plot that you can see in this bit. That could be the equation in a diagrammatic way of the D meson propagator. And now this self-energy, which again has temperature corrections, is expressed in the context of this D-matrix approach by this diagram here in this figure C, like a kind of one loop diagram. Not really one loop, because the vertex you put here, you introduce is the T-matrix itself. And remember that the T-matrix has some infinite resummation there. But okay, formally it looks like a one loop diagram, but it depends on T. So then you see that all of these equations are linked one by one, and then you have to do this in an iterative way. That gives quite a lot of complications with respect to the vacuum case. And then, well, you have to take some simplifications, yeah, to solve this problem. And one simplification is that I mentioned here is that we use some generic structure for this spectral function, or the D meson, but we set vacuum spectral function for the light particles. Yeah, and this approximation comes because the light sector has been already studied before. Basically, you need to do the same kind of thing in chiral perturbation theory. So there are already some results, and we already saw that the effects, medium effects in the masses of the pion is small, but in any case it's not zero. And then we try to plug that, well, we have some study using that thermal mass in our case, and at the end of the day, this gives us a very small effect in the charm set. So this is an approximation here, but we check that this approximation is good. Yeah, so, but this of course simplifies a lot the calculation, which in any case is complicated. Yeah. So I will show you now the results when you do this. Are these spectral functions for the D mesons. So if you look in the top panels, these are the D meson, the ground state here in the left. And now this is the DX, the strangeness partner, chiral partner. And then this spectral function is plotted as a function of temperature. So if you look, for example, at the purple, the most kind of purple or almost blue line, this is just a Dirac delta. Yeah, because we started in vacuum, we had just some stable ground state, with is for which the spectral function is simply a delta function located at the mass of the state. But as long as you increase temperature, and you go to most yellowish colors here, you see that the peak of this probability basically goes down a little bit. Yeah, the peak of the distribution of the spectral function, and it becomes suddenly, as long as you have non-zero temperature, it becomes broader. Yeah, so you have these two effects. There is a modification of the quasi-particle peak of the mass, quasi-particle mass of the particle, and also they acquire some thermal widths. As long as you put these particles in medium, they suffer interactions, the medium will broaden this spectral function. Now we did the same here for the dynamically generated states, for these resonances and the bound state. So in the right is the bound state, which looks similar to the ground state in the sense that you start with some delta function and the temperature effects, which makes it broader, even the point that they even merge to some continuum part at high energies. But in the resonant case, you start already with some resonant shape. Remember, we have two poles, so this is why you see here two peaks, lower pole, upper pole. And basically, the effect of the temperature is not that strong, like in the other cases. You have the mass, the peak of these curves only depend quickly on temperature, and also the decay width is more or less similar. They increase the width of these states, but you don't see very much differences. So to show you something a bit more easy to understand, these are directly the masses of the different states as a function of the temperature. So for example, in this top left panel, if you look at the black curve, this would be the mass of the D meson. So you start at vacuum with the physical mass from the PDG, if you like, and then as long as you increase temperature, it goes down. But the difference is not much. You see that the difference at top temperature of 150 is of the order of 30 MeV. Yeah, so there is this modification, but okay, it's a small modification. For the resonant states, the modification is even smaller. Yeah, it's very tiny evolution with temperature. And in the case of the strange sector, well, is something of the same lines. Like the D strange goes down, same 20, 25 MeV, and also this bound state is also going down. And here, okay, you have different results for the decay widths. Yeah, if you are interested. Now the point is also here to look at chiral partners, because you know that when you increase temperature, you are supposed to cross this chiral restoration temperature, in which chiral symmetry is restored, and usually you expect that chiral partners become degenerate in the symmetric phase. Now it happens that these two guys here, for example, DS and the DS2317 are chiral partners. They have opposed parity, but as you can see here, we do not observe, at least for these temperatures, any clear signal of the degeneracy. So of course, we cannot really go very high in temperatures in these chiral models. We cannot really go to the full restore phase, but from what we got here, we cannot really say there is this degeneracy. The same happens with the ground state, the D meson. With the funny thing that this is the first time we need to consider 3 different states when considering the restoration of chiral symmetry. So we have to follow the evolution of 3 states, not 2. But in any case, yeah, the conclusion is the same. We don't observe quite a strong indication of chiral symmetry restoration, at least with this, looking simply at the masses or the decay widths. Yeah, so if you have some question, maybe it's a good point to ask, because I will move to the second part of the talk. And maybe it's again related to this, but maybe if there's some question about this concerning this part, maybe you can ask now.
Okay. So you have a question. No, no, I think no.
Okay, if not, I will continue. And then, so this second part is now related to this paper that we are working on, and will be posted soon, hopefully. So the results are still preliminary, but in any case, even in the quantitative limit, quantitative perspective, the results will not change much. Okay, so and yeah, I'm going to look now at the many body physics, really, and then construct some kinetic theory for the D mesons. So in this section, there were many calculations, quite a lot of calculations that already focus on the charm dynamics and kinetic transport. And here I just put some of them from 2005 until 2014, list continues here, where they use some kind of kinetic approach, like Fokker-Planck, usually, equation, or even some Boltzmann equation, which are applied to some particular model or some effective theory to describe this charm. So now, in view of this list, the question is why we would like to address again the derivation, the fundamental level of the transport equation. Yeah, and the first reason is just for consistency, because in principle, what we know is that the interactions, which come from the effective Lagrangian, but also the kinetic equation, both of them should come from the same microscopic model or the same microscopic effective Lagrangian. So then if you will really be consistent, well, you should get both the cross sections, but also the kinetic approach from the same model or the same Lagrangian in our case. And the second reason is, okay, because now we would like to apply our scattering amplitudes in medium with medium modifications. So if we try to implement plain Boltzmann equation, which is basically used for vacuum interactions, like all these words here, well, we might be missing something. We might miss some terms that really appear only because of thermal corrections. Yeah, which may be cancelled in vacuum, but they don't cancel at finite temperature. So yeah, we wanted to look at this. And of course, the calculation is rather complicated. I mean, it has to go into quantum field theory. And remember that we have these spectral functions that are not Dirac delta anymore. So we need to have some kind of off-shell kinetic equation eventually. So we really need to go back and look more quantum field theory calculation. And the key point here is to look at these Kadanoff-Beim equations. The Kadanoff-Beim equations are explained in many classical references here. I will not give you many details of that, but we simply follow several of these references because it's rather a standard calculation, rather straightforward. There are a couple of details which are different in our case, but mostly it's the same idea. Of course, we are going to exploit that in our case, this dimension is always a good quasi-particle. I mean, we have this spectral function, yes, but the spectral function for this state is always narrow. So this will simplify some terms. And we also assume we work in a medium with a thermal medium, which eventually we can adopt this gradient expansion. So we kind of hydrodynamic expansion or expansion in gradients, which is also used to simplify the Kadanoff-Beim equations to reach something like Boltzmann equation, something like this. So the result after doing this looks like this. that could be some equation that we get for this G less. This is some kind of propagator for your D mesons. The equation itself, maybe with a bit of imagination, you can recognize kind of Boltzmann equation in the sense that you have some left-hand side of this advective term, and also some collision in the right-hand side. Even you can just say, identify a gain term and a loss term. In fact, this G is related to the distribution function. Yeah? This G, if you use so-called Kadanoff-Baim ansatz, is related to the distribution function of your D mesons, which in principle is out of equilibrium, so you need to solve the equation to get this F. But not only that, I mean, this is also information about the spectrum, so the spectral function goes together with F here. So in fact, this is a kind of kinetic equation, which is of cell. Of cell means that this K, I mean, if you remember, the Boltzmann equation works in the phase space, and the momentum space, you have, say, 3 degrees of freedom. So here we have 4, because now the energy and the momentum are independent variables. So now this is nice, but we still have to say what are these pi's, these self-energies. This is a retarded self-energy, and this is a couple of more here. So to close this equation, be able to write an equation only for G, we need to say what are these functions here. And for this, what we follow is some approximation of the collision term, with, not by chance, is called T-matrix approximation. This is described already in the first book, the first reference by the book by Kadanoff and Baim, but in many other references. And it's fully consistent with our T-matrix expansion in the first part. And the idea is that this self-energy is expressed in this way, diagrammatically corresponds to this kind of two-loop diagram, where the vertices, the vertices here are not the original vertex of your Lagrangian, but are the T-matrix, fully retarded T-matrix, which is exactly the one that we computed solving this Bethe-Salpeter equation. So of course, this is a two-loop diagram, but of course, remember there is a resummation in these vertices, so it is something more complicated. But this allows you to have a kinetic equation only in terms of the G functions. Yeah, and well, there's some small comment here that there is a sum over A, B, and C. A, B, and C, because we have different species. Yeah, we work with isospin, right? You have D, DS mesons, pions, kaons. There is a sum over the internal nature of the particles. Yeah? So we have to sum over isospin here in these propagators. So in our case, that means that we have all these possibilities there. Yeah? The internal propagators could be D mesons, could be DS, pions, kaons. Always, you know, not all possibilities, but only those which are really connected by our symmetries, whatever, like Lagrangian, yeah? With respect to quantum numbers. But in principle, we have all these channels to consider. So yeah, we have this equation, which now is closed, and then, well, there are some approximations. Yeah? To do this. So the first one, this is not really an approximation. This is simply this Kadanoff-Baim ansatz, how you rewrite your propagator in terms of the distribution function. And the second one, you do the same for the light sector, but there is now the approximation that this spectral function for your light sector, like as we did in the first part, is taken in vacuum, the vacuum form. So the spectral function for this light degrees of freedom is taken this way. I will call this the narrow quasi-particle limit. And this is one approximation, but it's supposed to be good approximation. At least we check this at the level of the heavy meson masses. And the second approximation is to take this distribution function for the light sector. Sorry, this should be phi. This is the light distribution function, which is taken to be the equilibrium one. So Bose-Einstein distribution function. And this goes in line to this idea that the light sector relaxation is faster than the heavy core relaxation. So then our our medium, basically, which is already thermal, is composed by the light degrees of freedom. So they equilibrate much faster, and we only need to focus on the evolution of the distribution function for the d mesons. So even if you take this narrow quasi-particle approximation for the light sector, and you apply the same, you assume that the heavy sector is also good to do this, which I will show you. This is a good approximation. Yeah, you can anticipate that. But if you just do this here, also for the d meson, what you get is some equation which you can integrate over the zero component of the energy that basically puts all your particles on cell, and what you get is the Boltzmann equation. Yeah, you can reproduce the Boltzmann equation for these heavy particles. But there is a difference with the Boltzmann equation, is that there are two terms here. In this, if you look at this T matrix, so one of them is in blue here, corresponds to the contribution of the T matrix above the two particle threshold. That would be the standard way that you find in the Boltzmann equation. And this is a contribution that comes from something called unitary cut of your G propagator. Basically, the imaginary part of your G propagator is non-zero when the energy of that G goes above the energy, the two particle threshold. But there is another contribution here which is applied in the difference of the energies of the particles. And this is called, this has a name, like this, the name is a Landau contribution of the cut. And at the level of the kinetic equation appears in this form. So this Landau cut, usually when you do, you apply vacuum scattering amplitudes, you forget about this term, because it is well known that this Landau contribution goes to zero when the temperature goes to zero. So you don't have this cut in the G propagator. This is well explained, good explained, it's classical well-known reference. But of course, if you keep things at finite temperature, and we would like to employ this with finite, with thermal modified T matrix, these terms is also contributing in principle, and you have to keep it. Yeah, and I will show you now that the contribution of this Landau cut is important for the temperatures we are considering here. So just to put you an example of this Landau cut, I will consider, before moving with the kinetic equation, I will consider this thermal width, the thermal width of the d mesons, which is also something that I show you in the first part. You can compute simply by doing this imaginary part of the retarded self-energy of the d meson. This is the way we did it for the first part. You can also do an alternative way, which is through these self-energies that I define now. It's totally equivalent. You can check analytically they provide the same result. But if you do from here, you get some expression that expression looks like this. It looks like this kind of collision terms in the Boltzmann equation, but it doesn't matter. The important thing is that there are two contributions, one again from the unitary cut and the other from the Landau cut. Yeah? So if I compute them for our case, I will show you the decay width, thermal width of the d mesons at three different temperatures. That would be 40 low temperature, 100 MeV, and 150 MeV. And this decay width is shown as a function of momentum. That would be the momentum of your d meson. And you see that at low temperatures, the contribution of the Landau cut is this dotted line, which is non-zero. It's small, but non-zero. And of course, the unitary contribution of this width is given here in the dashed line. Yeah? So in principle, if you go to very low temperatures, you can simply neglect Landau cut. And the total width will be approximately given by the unitary cut. But when you increase temperature, now the two contributions get of the same order. And at the top temperatures that we are considering, the situation have reversed. Yeah? The contribution of the Landau cut is the one that dominates, or they are the same order, but even is larger than the one from the unitary cut. So it received, the total width received a sizable contribution from this Landau cut. So it's something that is going to be important also in the calculation of the transport coefficients. So if I go back to the kinetic equation, yeah, it has this form. The standard thing to do here is again to exploit this difference of scales. I have this d mesons, which has a large mass, and the mass is a dominant scale in the problem, much larger than the light masses and the temperature. We have not exploited this at the level of the kinetic equation, but you can do it. So when you do that, you simply look at the scales and say that the typical transfer momentum in this collision, so the momentum that is transferred from the K to the light degree of freedom, is much smaller than the momentum of the d meson itself. So when you do that, basically you can convert this Boltzmann equation to some Fokker-Planck equation, which is much simpler to solve. This is explained in detail in these papers and this textbook. So we would like to do the same here. So instead of Boltzmann equation, what we have is some generalization of that, some off-shell kinetic equation, but we would like to take this limit. So when you take that limit, well, you get this kind of off-shell, if you like, Fokker-Planck equation. So it looks like a Fokker-Planck equation, but it's still for the same G, where energy and momentum are independent variables. So in this equation, you see that there are a couple of coefficients, A, B0, and B1. These are what I will call transport coefficients. Yeah? And in this step, this reduction from the kinetic equation to the Fokker-Planck, you get a precise form for these transport coefficients. They are computed as some integrals of some functions with this kernel given here. Okay, the important thing to know is that as long as you know the spectral form of your particles and the interaction, your T matrix, you can compute these coefficients. Just as a small comment, you can also take the on-shell limit here. You can assume this narrow quasi-particle limit for the d meson. So just say that d meson doesn't have any decay width, or it's very small, and you implement this. Then you can integrate trivially over the zero component of momentum, and then you recover the on-shell Fokker-Planck equation. And this is the form that people has been used in many of those references that I showed. So you can recover the same formal expression. There is only one difference, is that when you do this, you still have this contribution of the Landau cut. Yeah. Usually this contribution is not in any of these previous calculations, but we need to keep it here. So yeah, let me just, I don't know how much time. Okay, let me just explain this because it's simple and I think it could be intuitively interesting. So what is this interpretation of the coefficients, this A, B, and B0 and B1? So if you consider these coefficients like a constant, they have some momentum dependence, but you take some limiting with these are physically constant. Then you go back to the Fokker-Planck equation, say to this one, and then you solve it for F. You can do that. If you consider 1 + 1 dimensions, that is easy to do. And then you can plug the solution for some initial condition. So here, I put some initial condition of this distribution function, which is a delta function at some momentum. The momentum is k = 2. So the initial condition is a peak delta function here at the, you see, at the bottom, say, of this three-dimensional plot. So time is running from the back to the front. So now that means that I have all my particles or all my d mesons has a common energy, common momentum of 2 GeV. Now in the evolution, you see that this initial state is smooth, is basically broadened with time, and at some finite time you get some kind of Gaussian form. So then the interpretation of A is basically how fast the peak of this distribution goes to 0. So it's kind of the inverse relaxation time for the average momentum. You can understand this A, better the inverse of this A as a relaxation time. And now this B1, B0, they control basically the broadening of this distribution in time. So how fast or how broad this initial condition becomes is related to this B0 and B1. In one dimension, there is only one, but in principle, in three dimensions, you have the two of them. So in fact, when you take this limit, this k going to 0, when you are approaching the equilibrium distribution, there is a relation between all these coefficients. And this is typically the kinematic region where people compute those, because there is only one independent coefficient. And this should be like this. This relation is called Einstein relation or fluctuation dissipation theorem, if you like. And basically, this should be like that if you really would like to have the standard equipartition law of energy. So I will just show you the results for these coefficients. If I start with the drag coefficient, so this A, I will already take this k, small k limit. So this is just a coefficient as a function of temperature. And these are the results. So let me just first of all tell that the relaxation time, if you think of the inverse of this A, basically it's a function that decreases with temperature. It's the inverse of this, so this decreases with temperature, and that means that the relaxation time is smaller when you increase the temperature. And that is natural to happen because the interaction rate is increasing. The density of particles of light meson is increasing, so the relaxation time is decreasing. Now, if you compare this, would be this vacuum result and the blue dashed line, thermal U, they are the two on top of each other. That would be the effect of the temperature in the scattering amplitude. So basically, the vacuum uses the vacuum scattering amplitude, and thermal has this T square has some dependence on temperature. So this genuine dependence, they don't make much difference. We still hope that this, with the final results, there might be some small difference between the two. But okay, in any case, that would be very small. But this thermal U, in this case, is only when the unitary cut is incorporated, which is what happens in vacuum. Yeah? So the only difference is only temperature, but temperature dependence with only unitary part incorporated. Now, when you consider also the Landau cut, now you see the difference. Yeah? There is a huge, a small temperature, of course, they should agree. But at high temperatures, there is a big difference. Yeah? It's even more than double this value here. So this is very important contribution, the one of Landau. In all these calculations, we took the on-shell limit at the standard Fokker-Planck. But if we keep as general as we can, so to all off-shell effects, we can compute this dot dash line, which includes all the whole calculation, basically. And the final result is close to the red line here. So that means the off-shell effects by themselves doesn't give much effect. Yeah, and in the final result. Maybe it's a bit lower in this case, but overall, basically, you don't need to go off-shell. But okay, this is a good check. And the final comment here is that the main contribution to these coefficients is due to the d pion time. Of course, pions are most populated particles. That would be the main contribution. But of course, here, I didn't say, but we sum all these contributions. Huh? So interaction of d with kaons, anti-kaons, and eta mesons are incorporated here. So for the diffusion coefficient, I will show you the result of this B0, but not quite. I just show you this kappa. This kappa is simply a factor of 2, the B0 or B1 with this limit. And this kappa is the standard notation in lattice calculation. So because I would like to show comparison with lattice calculations, I use this kappa, but it's okay. And this is the result as a function of temperature. So in our case, I show the result using vacuum amplitudes. It could be this brown dash line, and the result of the full calculation with all off-shell effect. This is the solid black line. And you see that we get good approach around the crossover temperature, it would be around here. Yeah? But the full calculation gives a better connection with the lattice calculations. So I collected several of them. And you see that the full calculation gives a better matching at this transition temperature. So another option is to compute what I defined at the very beginning, this diffusion coefficient in space. It is also dependent on the other coefficients. So particular is dependent this way to be 0. And we already worked with this coefficient in the past. There was some old calculations where we used in the low temperature part our amplitudes in vacuum, but now we can do a bit more. We can compute thermal corrections. These are the new results, updated results, this diffusion coefficient. And to show you finally the comparison with lattice, I just plot the same coefficient multiplied by 2 times by this, this is so-called inverse thermal length. So just multiply by the temperature to get some number without dimensions. And that is the comparison, the connection with lattice calculations, which are noted here. And also some calculation that they use Bayesian techniques applied to real heavy ion collisions to infer this diffusion coefficient from data, from real data. And here is a bit more clear that the total calculation with shell effects and thermal effects much better with these calculations around the critical temperature. It should be around this 165 MeV. But and the vacuum calculation is still not bad, but it goes a bit up from this data here. Yeah, so that's the final part of my talk. So the conclusions are here. Let me just go quickly through them. So we have implemented this effective field theory to D mesons, now to finite temperature. And we did this just in a very self-consistent way, which allow us to go to values of finite temperature, in this case until 150 MeV temperature. So with that, we describe the dependence in temperature of the properties of not only the ground states of the theory, but also bound states and the resonances that we generate. We have readdressed this kinetic approach, the transport equation of the D mesons from quantum field theory. So for that, we employ Kadanoff-Baim equations, and we have eventually got some off-shell extension of the Fokker-Planck equation. With this, we have analyzed new effects coming from temperature, thermal effects, like thermal dependence, off-shell effects, in elastic channels. This I didn't show really in the talk, but especially this Landau contribution that plays an important role in all this phenomenology at finite temperature. And finally, I have shown you these transport coefficients for heavy flavor below the critical temperature, and we found a good agreement with calculations above this critical temperature, either from lattice QCD and from Bayesian analysis. Yeah, so that's everything. I thank you for your attention. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see if there is any question. Okay, I don't see any. So I have one, well, it's most a curiosity. So when you talk about the Landau cut, it is related with the phenomenon of Landau damping?
Yes, yes, it is related. Okay. So I don't have details of this G function, but yeah, it's precisely, this happens only with this very particular kinematic ranges of bypass. Well, I mean, I cannot show really much, but this happens at the level of the G, this two-particle propagator, happens at this kinematic ranges, which basically determine this Landau damping. And you know that this happens only at finite temperature and disappears at 0 temperature, but also these special kinematics tell you that this only happens when the two particles have either different masses or you are at finite momentum also.
Okay, well, it must be related because, well, what I understand for the is the Landau damping of a gluon that happens in when the gluon is space-like. So that must be related. This gives special kinematics for the fact that the interaction is space-like.
Yes, yes. I think it can be related. I mean, these papers also they comment on that. I mean, this this happens to very particular configuration of kinematics, and yeah, I don't know what kind of I don't know the contact with this gluon damping, but yes.
Okay, was just a curiosity. And then another question. Okay, well, do you know why there is no lattice data at a small temperatures when you do the computation? Is because they are not interested, or because it's very difficult to get data there? Yeah,
that's a very good question. I don't really know the answer to the question. I should ask the lattice people. In fact, I guess it should be very complicated. Yeah, this, as long as you decrease temperature, it gets much more computationally demanding. And the funny thing is that several of these works, they compute only at a single point. You know, this 1.5 TC is, I don't know, they like this point very much. And there are several calculations that only compute this temperature.
Yes. It's interesting also because, well, if you show the plot for kappa, which is the one, it seems that kappa goes up and then goes down again with temperature. It has a funny dependence.
Yes, that's interesting. That, I mean, well, kappa and this D they are related. Yeah, they are inverse to each other. So yeah, there was this conjecture that this coefficient has a minimum at the phase transition, or the other way around. If this kappa has a maximum, but kappa over the cube has a maximum at the phase transition.
Okay.
So that would be interesting because that would also constrain a bit this part here. Yeah? This is where we find more difference.
Okay, so okay, I don't see more questions. Okay. So let's say Juan again. Okay, so thank you very much.